Welcome to Your Iconic Image. If you want to take control of your image and be a power player in your space, then this is the show for you. Here we will arm you with tools and information to help you grow your brand on purpose. I'm your host, Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Now let's dive into today's episode. Travis Chappell is the host of Build Your Network, a show that Forbes features as a top 10 podcast that will change your life. He is also the founder and CEO of a new software called Guestio that connects high-level guests with high-level content creators. Welcome, Travis.
Hey, how's it going, Marlana? Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to get people to connect with you. So first of all, why do you think people have such a hard time with that?
Most people, I think it's just because they never took the time out to realize how important it is. And so they don't really have any, like systems or it's very much on accident, I guess is how I could say it is. Most people just kind of leave their connections, their network, the people that they get to know, they kind of leave it up to chance and just like, if I happen to be hanging out in that area and they happen to be there, then we might happen to meet or connect or whatever. And so I think that's probably one of the bigger reasons is just lack of awareness and lack of a plan or purpose to build in that direction.
So I'm going to ask you what I think is probably an obvious question, but how important is your network?
Yes, it is kind of an obvious question, but one that needs to be answered. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you asking. It's for me, it's pretty much literally everything. For everything that I've been able to do, it's all reliant on my network and the people that I know. And like anytime I try something new now, I have people that I can call and I can hop on a chat with and do it in like shave off months or potentially years of a learning curve or save myself a lot of money or, for example, this software company that we're building right now called Guestio. When I first had the idea for it, I had no idea how to run a software company. I really still don't, but I did have some cool people in my network that I knew had built and successfully exited big time software companies. And so I hit up 5 or 6 of those people. I hopped on some phone calls, did some lunch appointments and just kind of asked some questions on, hey, where do we go from here? What should I do? What's like the first step? And and then it was like, okay, raise capital. It's like, okay, great. But then that's a whole nother can of worms, right? So how do I do that? Who should I go to? What's the best investment vehicle? And those types of conversations, we'll see, obviously, because we're still pretty early stage with Guestio, but if it ends up going really well and we do have kind of a successful exit or acquisition or something like that, we'll see how much money it ends up saving me just by having the conversations with people that I had because of the investment vehicle that we ended up choosing that was a little bit more flexible for the founder. And we were able to raise capital through that investment vehicle. And now we're in a position where I still am like, I didn't get, ousted because I had to raise capital and now my equity dropped below 50% and I don't have decision or authority to make bigger decisions anymore. Like there's just a lot of things like that I just would have had no idea. But because I had people in my network, you can do a quick Google search, but then you're just reading the opinions of a bunch of random people online. So if you have people that like and trust and are familiar with, and they are willing to jump on a call with you, that advice is always better than just a quick Google search. And so that's, to answer your question, your network is everything. It's, you are the people that you hang out with the most. So choose them wisely.
So let's say we're just in the beginning of stages of something and we see someone that we really want to connect with. We believe that we can bring value to their world and vice versa, but they don't know us from a can of paint. How do we start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My biggest practical piece of advice, because we can talk, philosophy all day, but practical piece of advice is do exactly what me and Marlana are doing right now, which is start a podcast and interview those people. It's just the best way to get your foot in the door. It's the best way to have a conversation with somebody that normally doesn't have time to do these types of things. Like I don't have the time anymore. I would like to be able to connect with everybody who reaches out to me. But if people reach out to me and they're just like, hey, can we hop on a call? And there's no really reason for the call. It's hard for me to find time in my schedule to make that happen. But if it's a podcast interview, then it's easier for me to find time to make that happen. And so if you're kind of somebody in that position, I would ask myself, what would be a content channel that I could start that would allow me to connect with these people, whether it's a podcast, a meetup group, a live event, a virtual event, a YouTube channel, a, IGTV show, whatever it is that you want to do, like, build some sort of content platform that allows you to be able to connect to those people a little bit easier.
So are there any people that reach out to you that you won't connect with or you choose not to connect with? Or are you pretty much open to any?
I wouldn't say that anymore. When I first got started, pretty much anybody that reached out to me, I was like, yeah, let's do it, which I think there's merit to that when you're first getting started, is just, be willing and open to have conversations with everybody. When like people, I feel when they start something don't know really what to do. So they choose to do nothing instead of choosing to do something. And I was always in the boat of like, better do something, like fill up my schedule with something. I don't know what it is, but I'll fill up my schedule with something. And so at the beginning, yeah, anybody that reached out to me, I was like, yeah, let's hop on a call, and I'll try to fill up my schedule as much as I could. But then I started getting to where my schedule was full all the time, but like it is now. And now I just have to be a little bit more picky, a little bit more choosy, because I just literally don't have the time to talk to everybody, that reaches out.
So then how do we flip that? When you started off, you were doing a lot of the reaching out and it was more push on your part. Now it's all pull on your part. So how do we make that flip?
Yeah, you have to become a more valuable person. I tell people all the time, your network will increase in direct proportion to the amount of value that you can add to other people. With me in my position specifically, it's a little bit more exaggerated, just because what I happened to build, like the asset that I happened to build that brings value, happens to be a public facing asset, right? Like the podcast, it's very public, and people know about it. And like, that's what makes it successful, is that it's well known. But that's not necessarily always the case. Like I have a buddy that I golf with here in Vegas, and he runs a multi-million dollar e-commerce company. It's a giant warehouse out here in Vegas. And he's just super low key. You can't really find him a ton online. He's not on the top podcast. He's not doing any of that kind of stuff. But is he a person of value? You bet he is. You know what I mean? So it can kind of vary, and it doesn't mean that you have to like make yourself quote unquote like micro famous in whatever world that you're trying to be in order to be a person of value. But that's how it worked for me. And so I think I probably got to the point where my schedule was full of stuff before a normal industry person, before that would happen to somebody in a different industry, if that makes sense. Like in terms of the level of success that I reached was a different, like if you're going to be that low key person that's not like front facing and audience facing and stuff, it's probably going to take a little bit longer to fill your schedule full of stuff. But at some point it's going to happen. To me, it's just thinking about it in terms of simple supply and demand economics. Is if you want your time to be worth more, then you have to make it more in demand. So how do you make it more in demand? You know what I mean? Like, you basically have a bunch of people who want it. Why would they want your time? That's kind of the question that you got to answer. Why would somebody else want my time? Because I have some sort of knowledge to offer? Do I have some sort of content to offer? Do I have some sort of connection to offer? Do I have finances or money that I can offer? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I say. When you become a person of value, your time is automatically worth more because more people want it. And your time is the only thing that's completely scarce. It's the real asset. It's the only real asset that we have in life. Money can be replenished. Time can never be replenished. So it's by definition in low supply. So if you make it in high demand and it also happens to be in low supply, then your time is all of a sudden worth a lot more. And that's when that kind of starts flipping the other way around.
So let's say somebody is starting off in an industry. How can they bring value? And do we look for specific ways to bring value to specific people? Or do we kind of say, well, this is our area of expertise, so I'm going to apply it to everyone?
Yeah, this answer is kind of going to vary for every industry and every person that's listening to this. But the short answer is yes. Like everything, it's if you're talking about adding value to a specific person, then you can't just do a blanket statement of what could bring value, because you have no idea what brings value to somebody. You know what I mean? Like, people with a lot of money, believe it or not, like they don't really care if you're going to pay them $100 to jump on a phone call. They're still going to say no because
Mhm.
$100 is nothing to them. Even if you pay them 10 grand, you know what I mean? Some people just are worth so much money where they're like, nah, it's not worth my time. You know what I mean? So, but I guarantee you that something's valuable to them is my point. You
Mhm.
just kind of have to figure out what that thing might be. You know, could it be a connection to somebody that you already know, or a connection that you could potentially make, even if you don't know the other person, but maybe you're a degree away from that other person and you think that you could potentially make a connection and add some value there. Like we have this like little worksheet that we give out to some of our students and stuff, because I think this is, if you can master adding value to people, then you can master networking, in my opinion, because that's really all it is. It's just adding value to people at scale. And so if you can continue to add value to people in whatever way that you can, like I said, is it knowledge? Is it your time? Is it an action that you can take? Is it a skill set that you have that you can do for free? Is it buying their product or service? Is it being involved or engaged in their community if they have one? You know what I mean? There's a bunch of different answers to that question, but the bottom line is it's going to vary from person to person, because people value different things. I can't tell you what you value, Marlana, just like you can't tell me what I value. You know, the only way that I would know is if I followed your stuff meticulously, or I asked you a ton of questions, or I knew somebody in your circle that knew that you were looking for this particular thing at this particular time, and I happen to have something that could potentially help that, you know? So the answer is that it varies, and you're going to have to probably do a little bit of investigative work to figure out what's valuable to certain people.
And so do we then apply that same principle to, let's say we've now met someone,
Mm-hmm.
but we actually want to have built some kind of a relationship with this person.
Mm-hmm.
So do we use that same principle to continue on to build that relationship?
100%. Yeah. Some of my close friendships with people that I used to, that they used to have, you know, not know me at all, but people that I looked up to, and I listened to their, you know, podcasts, and I was consuming their content, and it was like, man, I would love to connect with this person. And these are people that like I text back and forth with, and anytime I shoot them a text, they text me. Sometimes they text me back. Sometimes they text me first to talk about something else. Like there are people that are actually friends and kind of almost colleagues of mine, even though I still look at them as being light years ahead of where I am. But yes, the answer is that if like a continuous relationship is based on continual value exchanges back and forth, even every relationship, your marriage, your relationship with your best friends, or your family, like maybe family might be the only one where it's not really based on value, because family's family, regardless of who gives what value to who. But you know, your
Well, it
friendships
depends
and
on
stuff
what
like that.
family.
Sure. Yeah. But your friendships are definitely that way, you know, like even if that value is just like, oh yeah, that I hang out with that guy because he makes me laugh a bunch and we have fun. Like that's valuable, right? That, or else you wouldn't do it. Like every relationship is based on mutual reciprocation of value in some way. And so you just got to figure out, you know, what that value is going to be for which person that you're kind of talking to. And then that's why I say you have to become a more valuable person, because in general, no matter who you're trying to connect with, if you are always focusing on making yourself a better person, then you're probably going to be more valuable to just about everybody that you connect with, because you have more things to offer to more people, you know. And I've always there's this verse in the Bible, it's I forget where it is, but it's the Apostle Paul talking. And by the way, like regardless of what your religious views are, this is something that I think is still really valuable. Especially if you look at it from a historical context, not even from a religious context, which is the fact that Paul was one of the best salespeople of all time. Really, if you look at it that way, he was somebody that took Christianity from being in like this small Jewish circles and like put it out to the rest of the world. And he did a lot of that work on his own with a couple of, you know, friends and colleagues. And one thing that he said is that he said something along the lines of, I'm all things to all people so that I might by some means win some, or something like that. And it's like the best networking advice that I could give to anybody, which is like, learn how to be able to be valuable in multiple circles and not just one, because it just makes you more valuable to each of those individual circles too. You know, it's always been valuable for me to find somebody in this circle, connect them to somebody in that circle, because like I talk over here, I talk about sports and, you know, podcasting and doing those things together. But over here, I talk business and marketing. But these people over here don't know these people over here. So if I can kind of be the bridge between those two people, there's a big value piece for both of those people, because they're both extremely high quality. They just happen to not know each other because they're not in the same space. You know what I mean? Like those are the things that I try to look at, where like, how can I be a more valuable person? And that's why, you got to constantly be learning and constantly be gaining new knowledge, new insights, new connections, new networking, like new everything yourself, because that's what makes you more valuable along the way. You know what I mean? And if you, if this software build goes well and we have a really successful exit, that's another notch in the belt that says like, oh, now we have this thing of value to offer to other people, is we can help you like learn from some of the mistakes that we made during our company build or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just doing more of those things that continue to help make you a more valuable person, which continues to help make other people want to connect with you. And when other people want to connect with you, networking becomes a lot easier than it is when you have to do all of the reach out yourself.
And it's interesting. I remember reading something that I think somebody actually said that be interested, not interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a piece of advice that, man, I've gotten, there's so many people that have said this. I forget who told me the first time. Who are you thinking?
I read it from you.
Oh, what, that was me that said that. Okay. Yeah. So that's very, probably very telling, because I don't remember who told me, which is why I don't give them credit whenever I say it, because I don't remember who it was that said that. But yeah, be interested, not interesting. And that is something that we strive to do as well. But more recently, the advice that I try to give people is be interested and interesting, because the interested part helps you to connect with other people. The interesting part makes other people connect with you. That's what kind of goes into be a person of value. That's kind of the same way as saying like be an interesting person. You know what I mean? Like if I have somebody reach out to me to be a guest on my show and it's just like another marketer, it's like, okay, cool. You in the last 300 people that reached out to me to be on my show. But it's like, oh, I'm a marketer, but I also do like, I don't know, ultra marathons or whatever. It's like, oh, interesting. You know what I mean? That's an interesting thing. Like you decide to subject yourself to a 100-mile plus race once a year or twice a year, and you train to be able to make that happen. That means you're running like 30 miles a week minimum just to stay in shape before you go. Like it's an interesting thing, because like, okay, now we can talk a little about mental fortitude and mental toughness, and there's different angles that we can bring into it. You know what I mean? So that's what I say when I say be interesting as well as interested now. Because you always want to be the other person facing. That's what interested means, right? Like don't hog the conversation. Be interested, meaning talk to that person, ask them questions, have some empathy, try to understand how they see the world, try to put on their glasses for a second and view the world through their lens. That's what I mean by be interested. But then be interesting is like when the conversation finally turns back over to you, have some interesting stuff to talk about. And that's why I tell people, like, get out of your comfort zone, go travel, go see the world, go, run that Spartan race or whatever, like get some stories, get some interesting things about you instead of just like spending every single night, in front of Netflix or whatever, like everybody else does. You know what I mean? And you can do that. Like you can do whatever you want, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you or not as easy for you to go out and meet more people if your story's not as interesting.
Right. And I think it's so sad how many people don't believe they have anything interesting until you start to talk to them, because I know I run into it a lot. And when they start to talk, you're like, well, why aren't you telling people this story or that story?
Mm-hmm.
And so many of them just don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely true.
So tell us a little bit about what prompted Guestio and what it's designed to do.
Sure. So Guestio was kind of something that came out of people asking me all the time how I was able to get the good guests on my show that I got. And from scratch, like without knowing anybody else and all that kind of stuff when I first started. And so we put out like a couple of trainings and things, but at the end of the day, the answer is that it takes a lot of hard work and persistence. And either people don't want to do the work or they don't have time to do the work, which I honestly is understandable. Now that I'm running multiple businesses and doing that stuff, I don't have as much time to do this cold reach out and persistence and follow up that I used to do back when I started my show. That was just my only focus when I started. So that when I spent like 15, 20 hours a week building this thing up on the side of what I was doing full time, the majority of my time was spent doing that. So I understand. I'm not even like faulting people for it. So at the end of the day, what really needed to be done was there needed to be some innovation there. There needed to be like, how do we shorten the gap between somebody reaching out to somebody really well known and them actually getting back to them and saying yes? And that's kind of what Guestio was born out of, was people kept asking me that question. I didn't have a good answer for them, except for go take this training and then spend the next 6 months of your life doing this thing. So now I can just say, hey, go to Guestio. We have an entire marketplace full of guests that you can, as a podcaster, as a YouTuber, as a virtual event host, as a Clubhouse moderator, you can go on there and search for people that you would want to bring in as a guest. It's called Guestio. So basically anything that you need an expert guest for, in any context for an interview, then you can go to Guestio and book them as a guest. We have a free marketplace with a bunch of people that connect for free all the time. If you can create a free account, you can go connect people for free. You can use all of it for free. But we also have a paid marketplace for some of those people that are just really difficult to get in touch with. And if you do get in touch with them, it's like, yeah, we have an opening in 7 months. You know what I mean? So those people are on there as paid guests, and you can just pay them directly for their time. And then they'll come on your show after paying them. So we have both the free marketplace and a paid marketplace that allows you to be able to connect with people to get interviewed on their show, or for you to interview them on your show. And that's what Guestio is.
And just because when you were talking, this question came to mind. When you were starting out and before you put this whole thing together, if someone came on your show, would you ask them for connections or referrals or things like that? Or did you just kind of allow that to happen naturally?
Yeah, I definitely asked them at the end of every interview. I would ask them, I think it was the last thing I said before we hung up, was just like, and like real quick before we disconnect here, do you know is there anybody that you think would be a really good fit for an interview on the show, is what I would ask. And then I'd follow up with those people. If they ever mention anybody, I'd follow up with them immediately. Hey, you mentioned that, so-and-so and so-and-so would be a really good fit. Would love to get an introduction from them. That was really how I filled up my guest roster when I didn't know anybody, because like I said, I was starting from scratch. But when you can get those first 10, 15 interviews through cold reach outs, it's a lot easier to go get more interviews when you have those people making warm introductions to people who they are, who people, to people that they are connected with, that they know, like, and trust, because that is a much easier yes. And it multiplies, it multiplies when you talk to one person and they refer you 3 people, and then you go to those 3 people and they refer you 1 or 2 people. Now you have like 12 people from one person, so it starts to multiply on itself. So I definitely did that when I started.
Once again, the power of your network.
Yes, 100%.
So out of all of the things that you are currently doing, where does your heart lie?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is my family, which is why I do everything that I do. In terms of like what we're working on, that I feel is something that I'm most passionate about, it's definitely the software company. I love my course and coaching business, and I love the people that come in through that. Guestio is just more of a big opportunity with a huge long-term potential future in it. And that's what kind of gets me fired up about that.
I know you also have a podcast profits webinar. Tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so that was kind of what I alluded to with the course and coaching, is we have our Podcast Profit Academy and private coaching program. And so we help busy entrepreneurs build profitable podcasts, and through a variety of, courses, training materials, coaching programs, packages, all that good stuff. And the way that, one of the first things that you can do to check that stuff out is you can go to podcastprofitcourse.com, and we have a completely free webinar, free online training. There is an offer at the end to jump into the academy if you wanted to go further with it, but you will learn a ton just by attending the free training. If that's something that you're interested in, you can go to podcastprofitcourse.com and get registered for the next training that we do. But yeah, it's called Podcast Profit Secrets. So we go into the three secrets that you might not know that will help you build a profitable podcast in 2021.
Because as Travis mentioned, this is an amazing platform to meet people and expand your network. Let me ask you, do you have any criteria for the podcast you will be on? For example, do they have to be a certain be on for a certain amount of time, or have a certain amount of downloads, or what's your thought on all that?
Yeah, for me specifically, I basically just look for a level of professionalism. The downloads don't really matter to me as much at this point. It's just like, are you going to waste my time? Is really the only thing that I'm curious about. Because I'll get on some interviews that I've said yes to. I used to say yes to every single interview request, and then I got on some interviews where the guest didn't even know anything about me. They literally, when I jumped on, asked me, "Hey, I don't really know much about you. Can you tell me like a couple of the highlights before we get started?" And I was like, "What? Why are we even?" What are you
Why am I
talking
here?
about? Why did you invite me to come on your show? Like, no, I'm not going to do your job for
You know who I am?
Like, go read
like my name?
literally a Google search and my about page will give you more information, more information than I'm going to give you right now,
Right.
So I just try to avoid those. So we just kind of look for a base level of professionalism that says like, okay, this person's probably not going to waste my time.
What about if somebody's podcast or their business or something like that doesn't align with you or your values?
Well, yeah, that would be another thing to consider. We haven't really run into that, but I do know of some people who have, where they've actually asked people not to release the episode because the interview didn't really reflect, what they wanted people to know. But yeah, if something's outside of alignment with your core values and your brand messaging and stuff, then it's probably not a good fit.
Now, let me ask you this too. Let's say somebody has a show, they have a guest on, and they don't feel that they have provided enough value for that guest. What are your thoughts on, do they release it? Do they not release it? Tell me what you think.
I tend to release basically every episode I record because you never know who's going to get value from it.
True.
Just because you don't get value from it doesn't mean somebody in your audience won't get value from it. So I tend to release all. I think there's like one episode ever that I didn't release. But yeah, but the majority of the other ones, even if I get off and I'm like, that wasn't that great, I'll still have somebody in my audience be like, hey, that was great. So,
Right.
you never know.
And it's knowing who you're producing this for too.
Exactly. Yeah. The question shouldn't be, do I think this is good? The question should be, does my ideal listener think this is good?
Right. And I was just asking from the standpoint of, for the value that you have provided for the person who has come on. If you think for some reason or another, you haven't provided that value for them, especially if you're starting out, but your advice would then be to go ahead and release.
Just go ahead and release it. Like done is better than perfect in my opinion. So I'm just kind of a fan of like, hey, you didn't do as good of a job as you would have liked to do. Get it out there, put it out there, learn from your mistakes. Don't do it again next time, but put it out there. You know what I mean? Don't like, I think people get too worried about that kind of stuff, especially people that have like 23 downloads an episode. You know what I mean? They're like, well, I didn't want to release that, or, it becomes an excuse at some point. And it's like, if you truly are just like, man, this would not be a good representation of my brand, then don't release it. But if it's just kind of like I wish this would have gone better, but I don't really know what I would have done type of a thing, like just get it out there, because at some point it just becomes an excuse to not release the content that you're creating.
So if we are starting off right now, what is the one thing that we can do today to start?
Starting off with a podcast
or building our network.
Okay. So, well, if you're starting off building your network, then I would recommend starting a podcast. Would be the first thing that I would do. It's honestly like, I know I run a podcast training community, so it's easy for me to tell people to do it, but it just is. I don't know how to explain it to people any other way, where I'm just like, every piece of my network in the last 3 years has come in directly from the podcast in some sort of a way. You know what I mean? Through some sort of ripple effect that happened that came directly from the podcast, just about everything. So I highly recommend people, like, if you're really focused and on purpose, like building your network, then a podcast is the best way to do it.
Perfect. So 4 final questions for you then, Travis.
Yes,
First one is, what's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Best piece of advice I was ever given is to only take advice from people you'd be willing to trade places with. And that would be, in that specific area, not necessarily you're going to trade your entire life with them, but basically meaning that if they haven't obtained the thing that you really want to obtain, then you should take their advice with a grain of salt. Most common way to apply that to life would probably be like, if you want to make a ton of money in business, and your parents have worked 9 to 5s their whole life, and they haven't made a lot of money in business, then I'm not saying to not listen to them. I'm just saying take their advice with a grain of salt and go ask somebody who's been there where you actually want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because like just because somebody loves you doesn't mean they're giving you good advice. And sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow. And I think too many people listen to their parents because they love them. And of course, like business entrepreneurship is a really risky career path.
Mm-hmm.
It's not guaranteed. Like as a parent, they probably don't want you going down that path because it's going to be full with stress and anxiety and obstacles and late nights and early mornings and all that kind of stuff. And it's a long, kind of treacherous road. And so they probably would rather see you in something more stable, but that doesn't mean it's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's probably some of the best advice that I've been given.
Next thing, share with us one thing on your bucket list.
One thing on my bucket list. That is a good question. I would say seeing half the world. I don't know if it's something that I want to do to see every single country in the world, because that's a big undertaking. And frankly, I'm not sure I want to see every country in the world.
Yeah.
But definitely 100. I definitely want to get over 100. So I'm at like 31 or something, 32 now. So yeah, I got like another 70 to go to get to that point.
Very nice. When the toy companies finally get around to making an action figure of you, what 2 accessories will it come with?
Well, I mean, probably one of these right here. Gotta be a microphone, probably, and some cash. Yeah, microphone and some cash. Maybe an Amex Black Card.
And last thing, how do people find you?
TravisChappell.com. You can go to Travis Chappell, CHAPPELL. TravisChappell.com. All my social links are over there. So it's a little bit easier just to say, like, go connect with me wherever you want to connect with me, but you can find all of them over at TravisChappell.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Travis. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Marlana. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Once again, I'm Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Please comment, like, or share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. For more information on how I can help you create your iconic image, visit marlanasemenza.com.